All right, so let's finish up on generators. So just to be clear of a few things. Generators are self-exciting, which means it does not need a battery. So if the battery is 100% dead, we can still generate electricity, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how that works is, well, you must have within the generator what in order for that to happen? Residual magnetism. If you have no residual magnetism, what if you have no residual magnetism and a perfectly good battery?
Yeah. It still won't start. It won't get itself going.
It won't get itself going because the battery has no way to get to the generator. So you'd have to
flash it.
Flash the field.
That's what girls do.
Okay.
I do it sometimes.
Got to flash. You have to flash the field. Then you'd get, but then you're still just getting residual magnetism, which then gets it going. So we've digressed rather quickly. Try to ignore it. So what happens? We have a little bit of residual magnetism, and then the generator starts going, and the armature cuts through the lines of flux created by the residual magnetism. The armature creates current. That goes out the commutator, through the coils, which starts the coils working, which then gives you more voltage. We have more magnetism, which gives more voltage, and then you got your 13 volts, just like that. So, all right. Let's see. So we talked about maintenance. We went over that whole thing about with the growler and checking for opens and shorts and stuff like that. Let me see. Brush seating. Sometimes you have to seat the brushes. Now, if you look at the generator that you guys have in class, you can see that if you look at the brushes, I mean, they're kind of shaped like, you know, where it rides on the commutator. Geez, it looks like that practically. And if it came out of the box and looked like this, you can see that that's not going to work as well as you'd want it to. You have to seat it, which means, you know, if the armature is running around like this, that's not going to seat real well, right? Not the best drawing. So you have to seat that. So the way you'd seat it, so you have to seat the brush. So seat the brush. Seating the brush. So sometimes when you have new brushes, you have to seat them in. I have two methods here that I could share with you. So method one. Method one. Run the generator on a test stand. On a test stand with triple aught sandpaper. Sandpaper wrapped around the commutator. Obviously the abrasive side out. And then the sandpaper causes them to wear in and kind of do that. Yeah. So method two. Method two, what is method two? Running the generator, place abrasive paper or stick against the commutator. The abrasive sticks to the commutator and then wears out the brushes or seats the brushes. Then you stop the generator and then clean all the abrasive out. So I think I would pick method one if you can get the sandpaper to stick. So,
Are we able to use anything to make it stick, or is it just
some abrasive stick. I've never had to do this. And if I did, I would use the sandpaper method. Yeah.
What about a brush seating hone?
Brush seating hone.
Hone. That's what I read in the manual.
Yeah, one said hone and then it said stone a little bit afterwards. So I don't know if one's a typo or what.
Well, okay, so a hone is really something that works best on an interior of something.
Yeah.
So it goes in and it will hone and make an interior bigger. So maybe it means stone. So while running, place abrasive stick stick against commutator.
What's the word before stick?
There we go. Place, well, and abrasive
We're not dead yet.
stick against, there we go, against a commutator. Against the commutator, they're abrasive transfers to commutator and wears in the brush. And then when brushes are seated, clean out abrasive. All right. Good enough for generators. I think that covers it. Let's see. Yep, covered that. Got all that stuff. So let's talk about alternators. All right, alternators are better in every single respect. I cannot think of a... Okay, there's one. Thank you. They're not self-exciting, so they're better in every respect but one. Thank you very much. But what's different about them is the armature is stationary and the field rotates. But we still have a stator which stays, which is the alternator, and the rotor which rotates, which is the field. So the field rotates and the armature stays put. It is not self-exciting. You need a battery to get it going because there's no residual magnetism left in it. It just doesn't have any. So you have to energize the field, which is spinning, before the whole thing works. For the most part, it works about the same as a generator. It's the same operating principle. Don't need that. Same operating principle, but I don't have any good pictures. I mean, I guess that's my only one. Where was it going? But instead of producing a choppy DC that is rectified with a mechanical commutator, this is going to create a three-phase AC in the windings that is rectified with diodes and cleaned up with capacitors or capacitor. So here we go. So alternator. Alternators. All right. I'm going to be off, so you have to keep correcting me because for some reason A is just ridiculous. I'm like, why did I put this? Talked about Faraday's first law. Whenever a conductor is placed in a varying magnetic field, an EMF is induced across the conductor called induced EMF. If a conductor is in a closed circuit, then induced current flows through it. We already covered this. Magnetic field can be varied. We know that. How can you vary? Nah, I'm not doing that. Okay, so A, unlike DC generators, comma, alternators have a rotating field, and a stationary armature. The output is still, well, I do this one. output is still DC. So let me see. The stator is the armature. The stator is the armature. Which means this eliminates, what's that? Eliminates something. Eliminates the need for a commutator, right? Yeah, eliminates the need for eliminates the need for a commutator. So a commutator is not a real good thing, right? It kind of needs maintenance. You got to have the brushes and seat the brushes, and they arc across the little segments, and and then what happens? And this is the big deal with the generator. Let's say it's a 30 amp generator. I create 30 amps in what? The field or the armature? In the armature, which is the spinny part or the stay part. The spinny part. You guys, now you're talking my language. Spinny part. All right, so you got the spinny part creates 30 amps. Those 30 amps to get to the aircraft go from the armature to the commutator, from the commutator to the brushes. So how many amps does the brush have to handle? 30. There's the problem, okay? So now you have trying to transfer 30 amps or however many amps across a moving surface. That creates a problem. So if we can get rid of that, we're going to be better off. Let's see. We just messed up here. 1, the stator is the armature. Got that. Oh, that should be a 1, I guess. This eliminates the need for a commutator. And then commutators have poor brush connection, especially at higher settings. So commutators have poor brush connection. Have poor brush connections. So, not a good thing, especially at higher power settings. So that 2, for sure, it's 2. Got it, okay. The rotor, make sure I say, so the stator is the armature. The rotor is the field. I think I got that before. Rotor is the field and gets its power, from the slip rings. So you still have a spinny part that has to get power to it. But this time, the spinny part, I don't want that, I want this over here. Let me see, do I have it? I have it over here. Here we go. Here's my rotating part called the rotor. Actually, I called it an armature earlier, so you have to. So here's the spinning, the slip rings, and you can see there's no cut segments on it, but there are 2 of them. So positive and negative, or negative positive, I don't know which was which on this, separated by an insulating material. And so the brushes are relatively small, and they don't have to go across little segments going this way. So they're going to last a lot longer, number 1. Number 2, you don't need that. So if I've got a 110 amp alternator, what, because I messed it up?
It's just number 1.
Yeah. So,
Sorry.
I know.
We knocked him off there.
I know, he's all off. Let's go out and come back in. All right, so what was that, number 1? Number 1, number 2?
Yeah, I don't know.
Am I number 2 now?
Start over.
Okay, so 1, you have slip rings, they're smooth. You don't have the segments going across, they're not going to wear as much. Okay, 2, if we had a 110 amp alternator, because alternators actually, 110 amp alternator isn't that big a deal. You'd have 110 amps, but it's not going through the field. The field only needs a couple of amps because you're just creating a magnet now. So you only have a couple of amps going through the brushes. Not a big deal. I shouldn't say a couple. You have a lot less for sure. But you have low power going through the brushes and the slip rings, which is really good. And then the part that has all the amperage, the 110 amps or whatever it is I want to play with, it's just sitting here in the armature, which is also called the stator, which isn't turning and spinning. You just have these wires and they are just connected down here to the diode plate. And so all the current is going straight through to the diodes and then out. No moving parts on that at all. So it's going to work much, much better. It lasts a lot longer. It weighs about a quarter of the weight. Produces more power. Much easier. And really, if you'd say, well, why does it produce more power? I think it just all stems from the fact of where the brushes are. The brushes in an alternator only have to deal with the field current, which is low. In a generator, the brushes have to deal with the full output, which is high. Rotor is the field and gets its power from the slip rings. Now you have one positive side, one positive, and one negative slip ring.
And you said there's like an insulator dividing those two?
Yep, because you have the positive and the negative.
What is that insulator usually?
Where is it or what is it?
What is it?
Baby seals. Makes the best.
Just the skin.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. So slip rings and brush assembly. Brush assembly have less current than a commutator. Have less current than a commutator. There we go. About 4 amps. 4 amps max. Versus a generator output of, 50 amps or whatever. So that means they're going to last longer. And no arcing. No arcing across segments. All right, what's the most important point about an alternator? All I'm thinking about it. The most important point about an alternator
It works at low RPMs.
is how to put those brushes back in. And I don't have the parts here. But you see that little hole? That little hole? What's that little hole for? And you should all be good at this. It's a little hole where you stick things into. Because I just feel like as children, you guys are the group that put things in stuff. The screwdriver is the exact same size as that outlet. It must go there.
There's no way you can go there.
When I was, I haven't told anybody this story. I'll tell you guys. When I was a child, I set the house on fire. I set the house on fire a couple times, but this particular time, I needed an extension cord, and it was around this time of year, and I was a little guy, and I had this little like plastic pumpkin with a little light bulb screwed into it, and then you plugged it in the back of the pumpkin. But I needed an extension cord, and I got to thinking, well, I got that. Well, I pulled the light bulb out, and I took an extension, I plugged it like that, and it arced, and it started the room on fire. So. Didn't work. I tried it,
How do you call the house on fire?
In the name of science.
The house?
Yeah.
Well, technically, those were just some pillows I started on fire, so it wasn't the house.
What
And
about starting a fire in general?
Oh,
Unintentionally starting a fire.
just twice. 3 times. Just 3 times.
Okay.
Only 3 times.
Just 3 times. Now that I think about it. Yeah. Day's not over yet. Okay, no arcing cross segments. All right, you guys have a test on, I don't. All right, alternators. Alternators produce 3-phase AC, and I hate to leave that like that, in the armature. because the output is still DC. So be careful how I say it. In the armature. So within the armature, it's actually going to produce three-phase AC. And you remember that looked more like this. So I'll just draw half of it. So you had three-phase, which is just three phases. That, let's see. Where did I go? Okay. Yeah, told you it's hard to draw that one. Oh, all fell apart. Anyway, so it's three phases, all happening simultaneously, and so you pick up the power pulses here, here, and here, so it kind of looks more like that. Yeah.
I was wondering what B was. I guess I missed that.
B?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Straight A to B, C.
A, B? No, there's C. Oh, I told you I skipped one.
Oh.
Remember, I said, hey, I skipped one, so you have to remind me that. Yeah. See, you can always tell the second semester guys, they're so used to this, they're like,
I
whatever,
don't
just.
even write the letter anymore.
I know, it's just, yeah, it just doesn't matter. Yeah. I just change what I want to say. I think of some different way to say it. I cut things out. So, yeah. And you can tell when I really go off because I'll start doing dashes too. All right. Back to this. Alternators produce three-phase AC in the armature. What is the output?
DC.
Okay, so we'll put that. Output is DC, just to make sure nobody forgets, because you'll be doing the oral. Well, it's an AC thing. And no, I didn't say that. So the stator, which is much easier to put than the armature, which is the armature. The stator or armature has three separate windings.
That's what makes it three-phase.
Uh-huh. Exactly. So for some reason this is like a thing, but maybe a Y or delta wired. And does it matter? Not to me. It does if you're the alternator. So the windings are 120 degrees apart. And if you were to get out your calculator and multiply 120 times 3, you would find that that is 360 degrees all the way around. So they're spaced evenly at 120 degrees around for a full circle. Which means the phases are also 120 degrees apart because that's the way it works. All right, A, B, sub B, C then. To create the DC output, alternators use a three-phase full wave rectifier. And if you remember from before, if I have a sine wave that looks like this, and it's a half wave rectifier, I am left with that. Or I could wait, you could do it again. There. So if I had a half wave rectifier, I'm left with that. Okay? If I have a full wave rectifier, and we started with something like this, when I'm done, it'll look like this. So it turns the frownies upside down. No, turns the happy face upside down. So it turns, yes, makes them all sad. So
Makes their mouth above their eyes.
yes. Well, now there's the eyeballs and there's the little nose and there's the happy face and then it turns around. So, all right. I should take a drawing class maybe. No comments. All right. So okay. Uses a 3-phase full-wave rectifier. This requires 6 diodes. And because they're wired in parallel, only the strongest pulse is going to get the, it's going to pick up the strongest pulse of each one of the phases so that it stays kind of on the top. I don't think I need to write that. The rectifier is internal, or the diodes, or diode rectifier, I'll call it that. Or Diode if you like. Is internal to the alternator. So technically the output would be like rippled DC, but the let's see if I have. Nope, no pictures. All right, we'll keep it simple. A, B, C, D. We have the 3 main parts. 3 main parts. What are the 3 main parts? You've already heard them.
Armature.
Okay, also called stator. The rotor. And the very good diode assembly. Now, if you buy an alternator for your car, or you buy a car with an alternator, which you already have, but you go to your alternator quits on you, you're in your car, and you go down to the auto parts store and you pick up a new alternator, they come with the voltage regulator integral to it. That's the funny thing. In aviation, you don't have integral. You still have a separate voltage regulator, but usually they're a solid state voltage regulator. And if you understand how a vibrator type regulator assembly works, then it's real easy just to back up and go, well, if we had a vibrator type assembly for an alternator, it works kind of the same way, except that it's never going to have a reverse current cutout. So why do I not need a reverse current cutout on an alternator? Diodes block it from going backwards. So it's already built in. So all you need is a voltage regulator and a current limiter if you wanted. Right? So it'd be just a 2-part regulator, or you can get the whole solid state deal.
I was going to ask that for the generators. Why don't we just use diodes instead of the reverse current?
Because they're pre-diode.
Dials weren't so good.
Yeah, they're like 40s technology.
Oh.
So why don't they just make them now? Well, they probably do make solid state voltage. Well, it just seems crazy to think if I had an old plane and it's got this generator on it, well, I want to get rid of my old-timey vibrating voltage regulator, so I'm going to go buy a solid state, really nice voltage regulator for my old generator. It's like, no, you would do the whole conversion. It's like, hey, I want to buy an alternator and I want to buy a voltage regulator. So you would update the whole thing. So otherwise, just keep the old stuff on there. 3 main part, let me see. Going to write this. Operation theory, same as a generator, but armature is stationary and field is rotated. I think I wrote that twice already. DC is created with use of diodes. I think I already wrote that. Drive methods, same as a generator, direct drive, belt driven. Yeah, we can move on from there. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. We'll move on down to this. We'll call it E, maintenance. Maintenance. What do you check for?
Belt
Cracks,
tension.
leaks.
There you go.
Security.
All right. One of the things that's really important on alternators, especially on Continental engines, especially on the smaller ones, the O200s and stuff like that, is Continental runs their alternators, a lot of them are not belt driven, they're gear driven. And now like my engine, the big 470, and I think the 520 sand cast. Now you get into weirdness about Continental. They have sand cast cases and permold cases. You guys should remember this. But and they'll talk this talk. It's like you got a sand case, you got permold on that thing? Well, and it's a way, it's how the cases are produced at the factory, whether they're cast in sand or it's an investment cast with, and they call it the permold cast. And it's like, ooh, these big fancy words. What's the real difference? The real difference is the permold case has got if you look at the right side of the crankcase, it's a 6-cylinder engine. It looks like it's got 3 cylinders plus a small one. Wait, what's the small cylinder for? They're just all in line. Cylinder, 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 hole for the alternator. And the alternator's just driven off of a gear inside. And they're kind of a pain in the butt because you got to set up that gear and stuff. And then if there's a failure of the coupling, it falls into the engine. So, don't love that part. Like I said, mine is just belt driven off the back of the engine, which is nice because if it's a failure, it stays external to the engine. But getting back to a lot of the smaller Continentals, like you could go out to any one of the Continentals, the 150s that we have out there. And if you look at the alternator, I don't know if this one will have it. Let me see. Oops. Picture here of the alternator. Kind of. This picture will work for my purposes of what I'm talking about. If I can get it from current slide. This one, of course, is belt driven. But if it wasn't and it was driven internally, you're still going to have this little fan right here. But the fan is kind of encased in the alternator. You can actually get to it quite easy because the fan, you stick your finger and move the fan. And so again, the ones that are gear driven, I always grab this fan and see how far I can move it. And you'd be shocked at how far sometimes you can move these things. And if you can move them really far, it means the coupling, which looks similar to what you guys are doing with your magnetos, how it's got that drive pin that goes in there. It sits between 2 rubbers, and those rubbers start to wear out, and then the alternator can move back and forth a lot. So on small engines, that's one of the first things I check on annual is how bad is that, and do I need to change out the rubber couplings inside the engine? So you always want to check your drive to make sure that your drive is good. So I can write that. But if I write it now, I'll be off on all my numbers from here on out. So maybe I won't write it right now. Let's see. Maintenance. So what do you really do? Before I write all this stuff, I'm thinking about you doing an annual inspection. What do you look at? Go back to this one because this one's. So you got this, and you're doing your oral practical, and the examiner says, well, your project is to inspect an engine-driven alternator. What are you going to inspect on this thing?
Belt.
What about the belt?
Belt tension.
Make sure the belt's not cracked and it's got good tension on it.
Okay, what's good tension?
I don't know. You want me to look it up in the manual?
There you go. That's the case. So be careful when you throw out stuff. Always say it. And as an examiner, I loved applicants who talked through things to a point. Right? Don't say stupid things. Well, okay, you want me to inspect this? What I want to do is I'm going to take a look at, first of all, the drive mechanism, the belt. I want to check the belt for cracks, checks, make sure it's in good condition. I would check the tension on it, but I don't know the tension. That is something I would look up in the airframe or engine manual.
Engine.
Probably the airframe manual.
Why?
Because by the time an alternator is put on, it's part of the airframe. That doesn't. So you have to think about what an engine comes with from the factory. So if I order a factory reman, like on light combing, I don't think it comes with an alternator. It would on a Continental because it's integral driven. Mine is external driven, so I don't think it comes with it. So it's a weird thing. But
You spend more money.
yeah. But anyway, hey, I'll look it up in the airframe. What if it's not in the airframe? Well, I'll look it up in the engine. It's one of those two, right? I'll get to it eventually. It's one of two manuals. So yeah, so checking the belt, check for tension. I don't know the tension. If ever that's asked of you, well, what's tension? I don't know. I'm going to look it up. You know, would you like me to look it up right now? I'd say, no, I don't want to. It's getting late. I'm hungry. So just I knew that you were gonna. That's good enough. What else?
Cracks.
That
fan.
when you were wiggling, or the,
Well, okay,
coupling.
if it's integral driven, I would check the fan. Now, if somebody said that to me as an examiner, I'd be like, damn. Okay, we're done here. That was good because nobody ever knows. Even seasoned mechanics don't know that. That's sort of an engine guy thing. So, all right, check that. It'd be very important to check all the hardware. Make sure it's secure. Like that one's got a little bit of orange on it, which indicates it's got torque stripe on it. So torque stripe. And then what else would I check? Wiring. Make sure that all the nuts are tight, that it wasn't just some lazy person who used the finger tight and was like, finger tight, close enough. Make sure you check cracks in this area right here. What?
Is that safety wire?
Right here?
Yeah.
Yes, but that would have been done at the overhaul facility.
So you would still check that way too?
You can. Yeah, these should not be loose, that's for sure. Yes. So,
Should.
yeah, don't take that apart. That's. Yeah, let me ask you that. Can you take this apart in the field?
No.
You can.
It depends on what the manual says, I guess.
Yeah,
Probably
can we
wouldn't.
put it together?
Depends on if you have a manual. If you have a manual for the alternator, then yes. If you don't have a manual for the alternator, because it's not an engine, it's not an airframe, they're not going to have anything on there. If you get into a component like that and you want to work on it, it's the component manual. So now you'd be looking for an alternator manual. So if you have an alternator manual and the appropriate tools, as an A&P, can you take that apart and overhaul it, fix it, repair it? Absolutely. And what you do to it?
Change the brushes.
Yeah, it's the only component part that's really wearable. Change the brushes, right? I wouldn't get into changing diodes and stuff, but you know, if you can, fine. It's not illegal as long as you have the manual. All right, maintenance. All right, what I wrote here. Let's see, maintenance. So I guess this is if you suspect a problem. By the way, I should throw this out before I write this. I'll get to it eventually. Somebody suggests, or let me think, what would the thing be? Well, just like in cars, you go out in the morning and you turn the car over and it's, it barely goes. And you're like, ooh, but then it starts. You got a battery problem, you got an alternator problem.
Battery problem.
Well, how do you know?
Could be both. Depends.
So how are you going to find out?
Checks the
Test
battery.
it, test the
Because I'm going to tell you, it's always two things. You know, one person can say it's a battery. Next one, no, it's an alternator, man. Well, there's always a third say it's going to be a generator. And you're like,
Look at
it's
your
a
ammeter.
2012 Honda, man. It's, you know.
Look at your ammeter and see if it's charging when you turn something on.
Ooh, that's pretty good. What if you don't have an ammeter, though? Your car have an ammeter?
No.
No,
No,
that's
you
it.
disconnect the battery.
Not that you. Yeah, just disconnect the
Yeah.
battery, see what happens. Now, there is a
I did that one.
old mechanic's tale that says if you disconnect the battery from a running engine with an alternator, you will fry the diodes.
Really?
Oh.
Well, that's what they say.
That's
They
why I
say
bought
that.
an alternator.
Did it do it?
It ran for a while and then turned off.
Now, I propose this to you. If that's the case, let's ask why. Why would you fry the diodes if you disconnected the battery? So I go out to my car right now, drove it in here, or any one of your cars, not Harry's though, because I don't think this would work on his car. So, because the Tesla, no engine and no alternator part. But anyway, go out to your car, start it up, run it. I'm going to go up to your, well, how much current is going from your alternator into your battery? You start it up, you got it running, pop the hood comes up, get my crescent wrench out of my back pocket, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to disconnect the battery. Which lead am I going to do first? Ground. Okay, so that's about how long it takes. I get out, how much amperage is going from the alternator to the battery at this point?
None.
I would say none.
Just a little.
Very little. It's just charging the battery. It's just a little trickle charge at this point. It should be a good battery. So so I pop this off. What have I done? Let's just say your battery was taking 2 amps at that point.
Made it a load.
It's not taking anything.
So I pulled off 2 amps from the alternator.
Yeah.
How many amps do you think headlights take? AC blower. It's a lot. So what I'm saying is the battery is just a small load. So if they say that disconnecting the battery will blow out the diodes, well, wouldn't it be worse to turn on your air conditioner or, God forbid, off? Because that's probably more amps, I think, than a charged battery. So do we think that? Obviously, I don't think that's true. Okay. However, I think if we follow the trail and say, why do they think that's true? Well, let's just say, suppose you decide to undo the positive first, and you drop the positive and it hits the frame. Now what's the load on the alternator? All of it. I think that would probably destroy a diode very quickly if you did that. So I think that's where that comes from, just proper technique. So I don't know, where's I going? Okay, so we're going to figure out, is it battery or is it alternator?
Take the battery out.
Do what?
Take the battery out.
Take the battery out?
Yes.
So I disconnect the battery.
Go get a check.
Okay. And
Is it running or not running?
the engine stays running.
Then it's your battery.
Buy a new battery then. Still does the same thing.
There you go, starter problem.
Now, your card isn't going to use that many amps. So let's just say your alternator's dying out. Let's go both routes. Battery's dying. It won't hold a charge. It will definitely drag when you try and start it. You've got to be more scientific about this. So, but why is the battery dying? Is it not getting a charge? See, you're back to the same thing.
What if there's a light on at night? Now you're trying to start your car the next day?
How about trying a voltmeter on something?
Yeah. Check your output voltage of your alternator. See if it's putting out.
Where are you going to check your output voltage?
There's some leads on the back there.
Yeah, you just do some leads.
And ground to the case.
Huh? Where's the alternator output go to?
The battery.
All right, so what are we going to do?
Put a voltmeter on the battery.
Put the voltmeter on the battery. It says 12.5 volts.
Dead battery.
Yeah, it
It's a
sounds
little low.
It's 12-volt battery. If the alternator normally puts out what, like 14 something? 13 and a half.
13.5.
Cutoff.
Yeah, but what's a battery?
12 and a half.
So I just said it's 12.5.
Okay.
So is it good or bad? Where's your problem?
Now I'm confused.
It's a confusing thing, but it's not.
Replace it all and see what happens.
Okay, what should the battery voltage be with the engine off?
With the engine off, 12.5.
About 12.5? Okay, so if I measure 12.5, what am I measuring? Battery. Charge a battery, how much the alternator got to put out?
13.
About 13 and a half or so. So if I don't have 13 and a half, what's my problem?
Alternator.
Alternator's not working. So you should have more than battery voltage. So it's one way to do it. Turn off the car, check the battery voltage, have somebody turn the car on, and the voltmeter should go up. And why would a car still run if it's got a bad alternator then, if you disconnect the battery?
It's not that much battery.
Well, what if it's putting out 8 volts? So if your alternator's dying, you got a couple of bad diodes, it's still putting out some voltage, your car can pick it up and use it, well, it will. That's why it still runs. So the easiest way is just to check the battery voltage, start it up, should go up. If it doesn't, well, there's your problem. Or take it off, take it down to AutoZone, have them test it. There you go. Let's see, test rotor. So if you have a bad alternator, there you go. So test rotor. These are things you can do when it's like bench test. Test rotor for opens and grounds. Test rotor for opens and grounds. So rotor, here's my rotor. This should be a contained unit, right? It shouldn't be going out to ground. If I got a positive and a negative right here, and I've got my coils here, so the negative comes in, runs through out, positive back out. There we go. It shouldn't be going to the shaft or anything else because that would be a short. I should get continuity between those two rings. If I don't, then I got an open. So let's see. We can say one, use ohm meter, Lululemon meter. Meter to test continuity. Continuity from one slip ring to the next. Slip ring to next. This is assuming you want to take it apart.
What if you don't want to take the part?
And if you diagnosed it as probably being bad, that's fine. There's not a problem with, don't take things apart if you don't know.
You don't have to.
Yeah, well, I say don't have to. It's like if you diagnosed it and it's bad and you don't have the capability to repair it, you don't have a manual, then don't take it apart and waste time. Just replace it or send it out for an overhaul.
And so normally it seems like with cars and stuff like that, if you get a bad alternator, you take it in and you just buy a new one, use that one as the core charge or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the same thing in aviation, or do they send them off to be rebuilt?
You can send them off to get rebuilt, yeah, or you can do the thing with the core charge and get another one. Depends on your speed and of which you want to get it done and price. Use ohm meter to make sure slip rings to, I'll just say to test from slip ring to ground, right? Should show an open, not to ground. We can test the stator. Test stator. Let me see. Should have low resistance. Low resistance through the stator. Through the stator. Just check between each wire. Check. Between each wire. So you have your stator. There's your wires. So you just check between each one. Check at the ground. Should have low resistance going through. Guess you could check the diodes too. I didn't write that down. Let me see. Infinite resistance. I'm not going to do that. From, let me see, infinite resistance from the lead to ground, according to my book here. And we see 1, 2, 3, no loose wires. And let me see here. This one. I've got directions here to go over one of the regulator units. I forget where I found it, but I didn't put a picture, so you're off the hook. And it's just a semi-solid state one. Semi. Alright, alternator control, let me see. 15, 16, 17. Oh yeah, we'll do this. Oh, break time, huh? Okay.